Greetings, you happily miserable accursed. It's our annual Monday of the August long weekend pod, a cherished annual tradition here at Air Quotes Media. Depending on where you're listening from, today might be Civic Day, British Columbia Day, New Brunswick Day, of all fucking things, Natal Day, Saskatchewan Day, Heritage Day, Terry Fox Day, and in Ontario, I just dare you to name what day it is where you are, because there's way too many municipal holiday names. But basically, it's the take a day off in August day. Quebec doesn't have it, which is why presumably we're on, because I'm in Quebec and there's not a holiday today. But I'm going to take advantage of it. This is my lemon heart rum and coke drinking immediately after the show day. So
But not before the show, disappointingly.
I know, not before the show. You want to record too early. You know, I need till at least 10, 11 o'clock before I can have a rum and coke. You're back, Jordan.
I'm back.
How was it?
It was so good. We went up the North Shore of the St. Lawrence. We saw whales, multiple kinds of whales. Did some hiking, did some camping. It was beautiful. We had a really great time.
I don't know how you recovered from that frog. I am still scarred by the image of that frog. I wouldn't have lifted that thing up on a bet. And there's your daughter clutching it like it's her new puppy. My God.
Yeah, she was squeezing that thing like it was a stuffed animal. I mean, I think that frog is somewhere up in Algonquin really questioning its life choices.
Are you kidding? That frog is obviously some sort of leading genetic kind of creature that's gathering the amphibian forces. They're going to burst out of the woods and take Huntsville, and then from that beachhead, the rest of Ontario will fall like timber.
How close to Chalk River were you when you discovered that, that frog?
You know, not as far as you would like. You're right. You're right. Well, anyway, maybe she'll be their fearless leader. I'll put in a good word for you guys.
That's right. Although in university they told me I would be the first to go in the revolution.
You find it strange that there are things in our world that operate alongside us that are amphibious, and yet we've never thought, well, why don't we adapt ourselves to, like, that would be more efficient?
Why would it be more efficient? We're a superhero, other than Captain America, probably, is actually obviously Aquaman. Like, what a limited skill set. Like, how many things can you really affect?
He can command a great white shark. He can command a gray whale. He can move water with his mind.
And I mean, if we accept the future that everything is going to flood because of climate change, maybe Scott's onto something.
Well, maybe in a water world scenario.
Yeah, that's it.
Exactly. You have it.
You know, I can tell that none of you have noticed while you've been gallivanting around that the best professional football team in Canada resides in the province of Saskatchewan.
I have noticed. I went to a CFL game last weekend.
Oh yeah?
Yeah. I got
Toronto's not much fun to watch without Kelly. I mean, I don't like their quarterback.
No, they're terrible. I mean, they won that game. Then they got pounded this weekend by the Blue Bombers in the home and home. But yeah, anyway, might go back.
Anyway, the Riders are rocking it on both sides. Go boys. All right, so we got a show today. We do, even though it's a holiday and we're bantering, which is controversial. The controversial banter. But we do have a show. Our show today is the Canada-U.S. trade deadline came and went. Trump hit us with a 35% tariff on non-CUSMA compliant goods because he says fentanyl and other illicit drugs are absolutely flooding over the border, of course. Yeah. Minister LeBlanc was on Face the Nation yesterday and said he was encouraged by recent discussions. We'll talk about the whole thing. Our cursed clipping is related from Robert Benzie at the Star. Doug Ford says things Mark Carney can't as Trump's trade war escalates. And last week, Prime Minister Carney added Canada to the list of countries that will recognize Palestinian statehood under certain conditions. We'll talk about that. And then it's the eternal Mr. Pinsent and our Hey Yous. So, you know, Kory, you know a lot about this. Let me just start. Like I'm watching Minister LeBlanc on Face the Nation yesterday, and you know it's great that he gets that airtime, and he did his usual highly competent job. But at the end of it, I'm left wondering, what were they doing down there, and what was the value of what they were doing down there? I mean, there's a story going around about Switzerland, about how Switzerland went through all these consultations with all the right people and thought they had an absolute deal with the United States. And then it gets announced, and they're paying among the highest tariffs in the world. And they had no idea. They were literally shell-shocked when it was announced. They thought they had agreed to something else completely. So why is anybody bothering to talk to Leichnitz about anything when it seems evident that this is a capricious decision by Trump at the end of the day?
It's a good question. Like, I think that's the reality of the talks that are going on, not just for Canada, but for seemingly every country in the world, as you pointed out. And some of the other deals that we've seen, like Japan and the UK, like they were, last minute things that Trump was demanding, or differences of understanding as to what would actually have been agreed to in their framework. I think it's, even after you've negotiated something, as we've talked about many times before, a deal is not a deal with this guy. A deal is a deal until he has a mood swing, or as Ford likes to say, until the cheese slips off the cracker.
Yeah.
It's a very challenging environment. It's increasingly clear that this is about raising revenue, and that large trading partners are probably more in the crosshairs than minor trading partners. If you look at who they've sent letters to and who they're focusing on first, they're focusing on their largest trading partners. And the deal is you're going to have a pretty high base level of tariffs. Now, the good news for Canada in the immediate term is that CUSMA compliant products are not going to be facing tariffs, which means in reality, Canada has the lowest tariff rate in the world right now by significant margin. Like we're, like 5% or less, whatever the latest calculation is. But some of the sectoral specific stuff, like on steel and on autos, those are going to be punishing. And I'm seeing no signs that the U.S. is going to relent on that stuff. I think they're going to hold on to it, and I think we're going to be facing across the board tariffs just like every other country in the world.
And Jordan, surely CUSMA's next. Like, so CUSMA's in place and it's a break for existing trade. But nobody would make an investment in Canada based on the existence of CUSMA right now.
Well, that's just it. Like it's a break for now, but you can't forget that we're headed into a scheduled renegotiation next year anyway, and the capriciousness that you've seen from Trump around these, well, let's not call them agreements, they're really like letters of demand.
Yeah.
I
They're
think
shakedowns.
that's right.
Yeah.
We have every reason to expect that that will extend to a renegotiation. So it's a bulwark for the moment, but there's no guarantee that it will last, particularly once that floats onto his desk, into his attention sphere. There's going to be likely all sorts of things that he will be interested in dismantling in there. And the other problem with that is that the sectoral impacts, like those sectors that have been targeted, so we're talking about steel, aluminum, auto, now lumber, time is really the enemy there. So even sort of waiting, like any duration where they continue to face those increased tariffs that are outside of the agreement is increasingly punishing for those industries. Like we started to hear a lot of, I don't know if you guys saw this last week, but certainly a lot of noises coming from not just even from those industries, but of course businesses that are also involved in those supply chains, basically saying like we've held it together until now, but this cannot endure. Like there's going to, we are likely to start to see more significant layoffs, more significant impacts as we go ahead. So I think that, the notion that we've escaped anything to me is a little bit fictitious. Like we're going to start to see those impacts, and we're about to be thrown into really a second and probably even more consequential round of shakedowns with Trump in the coming year.
So there's this adage in competition law that says if most competitors aggressively oppose a policy, it likely benefits competition. With that as background, let's turn to the financial and investment analysts and look at their more objective arguments about enabling wholesale internet access. I mean, investors rely on their data analysis and research into market sectors and the companies that compete within them. So why shouldn't we? To catch you up, we've been talking about how Bell is lobbying the federal government trying to prevent our presenting sponsor TELUS and other providers from having access to Bell's fiber networks in Ontario and Quebec for the purpose of wholesaling internet services. This after a thoroughly reviewed CRTC decision that said Canadians would benefit. Bell's core argument to the feds? Allowing other companies to wholesale undermines the entire business case for continuing fiber investment. Except analysts from 5 major Canadian banks, TD, RBC, Scotiabank, BMO, and CIBC, don't agree. Their reports argue in favor of wholesale fiber and the broad business case. They assert that the CRTC decision strikes the right balance between ensuring a competitive market on one hand and network investment in the other. The analysts go further. They disagree with Bell, claiming the CRTC decision will result in a decline in future telecom investment, arguing 1. Bell can still achieve good margins on wholesale rates from TELUS. 2. Investments continue to be robust. And 3. Given that internet resellers currently represent less than 5% of the market, any projected demise seems to be greatly exaggerated here. So the bank analysts have spoken with an objective voice on behalf of wholesale fiber, truly competitive markets, and ultimately, what's good for Canadians. Yeah, Scott, it feels...
Thank God you're coming to me because I got all the answers. Whew,
I am
people
coming
don't
to
have to
you.
wait any longer.
It feels like you could imagine a scenario where if Canada was able to integrate the massive amount of defense spending it's going to be doing with the massive amount of infrastructure spending that it's going to be doing, that, and you had rules that maybe you could save the steel and aluminum industries, maybe the lumber industry is part of home building. I mean, I can see how this all comes together, but not in a relevant time frame.
Well, and probably still not at a significant enough scale.
Right.
I mean, like, I'm not sure you can just get those things to balance. So, or even come within hailing distance of balance.
Domestic consumption is not going to equal our export.
So, I assume in those industries, first of all, is it CUSMA or CUSMA? Is it USMCA? Is it USMCA?
I try to
what
say
the fuck
it in a
do I
way
call
that
it?
sounds as undirty as possible. I try to say it in a way that doesn't sound in any way
NAFTA
disgusting.
2.0. How about that? Go
Yeah,
with the
no.
OG name.
Yes. Well, I'm not going to swing at that pitch because I've been advised strongly that I am a phallocentric commentator. It's time to clean my act up. What can you say? I think in those industries, those hard to hit industries that are not protected, obviously, that are not CUSMA, CUSMA, free trade compliant, that we're going to see some short, medium term play. So there'll be some industry and there will be some employee supports thrown at them to try to kind of keep people not whole, but keep them afloat. There will be a big emphasis on domestic production. My guess is orders have been barked to say, let's get some shipbuilding announcements, or let's get some construction announcements, something where we can say, look, see, we're turning on the faucet of domestic demand. So it isn't all just hopeless. But I don't know how you can look at anything that's gone on without coming to the conclusion that there's an irretrievable rewiring of the global trading and economic system. You can't hold out hope that, Trump will be gone in 3 years, because 3 years is too long. So, people are going to be forced to make critical investment decisions. Some will scurry behind the tariff wall. Lots won't be able to or won't. And so there'll be more expensive. I think the price of everything is going to go up in the next 18 months. I think you're going to see other economic impacts. And I think it means, I hate to say this, both my folks were, CAW members working on the plant line, not in auto industry, but in factories in Eastern Ontario. Those factories are gone now. But how does the auto sector and steel and aluminum, how does it survive? And he seems determined to kill it. And when you say, well, why are we still talking to Lutnick? I think it's the same reason that you three still talk to me, not because I'm the best person to talk to, because I'm the only fucking person who shows up, right? So, like, what are you going to do? Not talk to him, I guess, but like, you must feel like you're firing rubber bands into the sky. And look at, I wonder if my only hope, and I know this is futile, and I know nothing about trade policy anyway, so it's just, it's literally a waste of internet.
You don't know anything about trade policy? What are you doing on this show? Like, why didn't you tell me earlier? Like, what the fuck?
Oh.
We're friends. You could have told me.
I mean, listen, I've purchased a couple locomotives through some of my shell companies that are, from South Korea, obviously. But all I would say is he's got 3 pieces to every deal. And Canada uniquely can't fit that, right? So the 3 pieces are an across the board sticker price tariff, right? Of somewhere between 15 and 19% ish, somewhere in that zone. And there's some that are higher, but an across the board. Then there's a commitment to buy a shitload of stuff, like $750 billion worth of energy from the EU, and $600 billion in various other services and goods. And then there's a commitment that market will be open, right? So even as he's saying, I'm making my market less open to you, I demand, as though like it's a matter of absolute course that you must open your market. Now, they're not really going to open their market. The EU obviously can't actually command that its member states purchase $750 billion worth of US energy, all that kind of stuff. But those things don't fit Canada because we do have the free trade agreement. So we can't accept an 18% across the board tariff rate. Why would we fucking do that on industries that are USMCA compliant? Makes no sense. So then like what, like, so is there any possibility that we could say, look, we're going to defy the model by putting a ton more cash on the barrelhead. Like we will be purchasing like whatever, name your number, 800, I don't know, like how many billions of dollars, how many hundreds of billions, is it $2 trillion of shit over the course of the next 8 years? Like, does that offer any? But you just get the sense that right now he wants the revenues that he thinks he's going to get from duties. And so you're left nowhere. Here's the last thing I would say though, just on the politics of it. Isn't it fascinating how Carney handles these events? So when the DST happened, it felt like it was a shock to the system. He did not hold a press conference. He did the lightest of avails as he walked into a cabinet meeting, paused for a second, said, hey, you know what, we'll continue to sort of pound away. We were going to have to remit those duties anyway, so what the fuck, and we'll keep the talks on track and we'll see where that takes us. He didn't even do that much. This event happens. The issue of statement.
Let's keep the government's phlegmatic response to the clipping.
Okay. All right.
Because it really belongs there. But Fräulein Leichnitz, I want to leapfrog something that Scott said. I hear rumors the European Union deal isn't going to hold, that the countries in the European Union don't support the deal.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, there's sure, like, we
You
can
hear?
say diplomatically a diversity
I hear because I'm an
of
insider.
opinions.
What I was gonna
Unlike
say,
you,
you're
I'm
talking
a
about-
trade expert.
Yes.
Right?
It's all right.
The
David
Spanish
has his
and French
European
are telling me.
sources.
Well,
Yeah, for sure. This is not going to have a unanimous appeal across Europe. It's not across the board agreed that this was a good deal for Europe. And so I do think that they're going to have trouble getting it through with good reason. And look, I mean, I think that some of the challenge for Canada, just to touch on something that Scott was saying, is that there is no evidence that any concessions from Canada make any difference in this, like none. So Canada's made significant moves on border security, on defense spending, on the digital services tax, and none of that has played in to what
border security. Let's be clear about the fentanyl stuff. Let's just can we level set on this?
Sure.
On the fentanyl stuff. Kory, this is just the justification for him to do the
Correct.
tariffs, correct?
Correct.
Like it actually has zero.
It's necessary
basis
for
in
him to
reality.
say it.
Okay, but we
Yeah,
like
here's-
rented
here's-
Black Hawk
requirement.
helicopters and sent the
Here's-
video over to him. So I mean,
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
doing the dance, right?
I know,
is
but
my point.
we probably should never have done it.
We
because
probably
it
should
was
never have done the dance.
Well, there's nothing inherently bad about cracking down on fentanyl in Canada. In fact, I think it's probably pretty popular with Canadians. But you're correct. Like that is the justification that allows him under U.S. law to level these tariffs. And so he's going to hang on to that until we come to an agreement on tariffs. But look, there's some other things going on. Like ultimately, the momentum against this isn't going to come from Canada or any other foreign country. It's going to come from the U.S. economy, and the stock market's at all-time highs. Largely as a result of the fact that services, so think of the magnificent seven tech industries. They're all at record high stock prices. They're not facing any tariffs. That's what's driving the market forward. But if you look at the auto sector, which the president says he's doing this to restore U.S. auto protection, they're taking heavy losses as a result of tariffs, and those losses are only going to become much deeper over time. Like
And their
this notion,
CEOs are speaking out, by the way.
they are, because it's existential for the industry. Like what he's going to succeed in doing is driving the North American auto industry into bankruptcy if he keeps going at this rate. So, at some point, gravity kicks in, or maybe he's in free fall right now. Maybe it's that you hit the pavement. I don't know. But at some point, there is going to be a punishing price that the U.S. economy is going to pay for the destruction of virtually every supply chain and the cost pressures that that's going to impose on consumers. So let's see what happens going into the midterms. Let's see how quickly this starts reflecting itself in the economy. It's not instant. When you raise tariffs, it takes many months, kind of like lowering interest rates. It takes many months before it permeates its way through the economy and you start to see the effects. But the effects are not going to be good for the United States of taking these actions. So, time, I'm not going to say it's on our side, because clearly if you're in the steel industry or the aluminum industry, you don't feel like time is on your side. But I think overall, time is our friend on this. Like we need to have something happen in the midterms. Let's knock on wood that occurs, and we need to see some of the negative economic
You're
consequences
watching
of
the
these.
redistricting that's going on.
Yeah, well, and
Yeah.
and the changing of how they collect, labor stats and everything else. Like we live in the age of lies.
Yeah,
Can
I mean,
just
but
add
that's
one other.
sorry.
Well, I was just going to say there's one other thing which is beyond the normal ambit of our pod. This has got to be the greatest development that the Chinese could possibly imagine. The consequence of these decisions that Trump has taken when rolled up is the most incredible expansion of their soft influence, authority, and power they've ever experienced, really. I mean, like, where do you think we're going to have a political
Our
debate
friend
in this
Peter
country?
Nicholson, who's one of the smarter people I know, has been telling me for months now that this is the unilateral disarmament of America on the energy transition. And he said, in the long term, insane.
And
Yeah.
look for all across the board, we're going to have an uncomfortable political debate in this country that will be driven out of necessity about how we're going to have to massively increase, notwithstanding the last 10 years of geopolitical discomfort with China, how we're going to have to massively increase our relations with China and India. Why? Because you got to fish where the fish are. And we can talk about let's strengthen our relationship with EU states and all that kind of stuff. That's 100 years war, man. Before, so we're gonna be driven, as are other nations, into the arms of China, into the arms of India, and they are going to say, all right, well then we'll fill as much space as the United States can vacate. Electric
Hey, did you see
cars
that
are all
hard
going to be
right that
fucking
Modi
Chinese.
landed on Trump yesterday?
Pardon me?
Did you see that hard right hand that Modi landed on Trump yesterday?
Yeah.
Which is, all right, fuck your F-35s, buddy.
Yeah.
Right?
It's anyway, whatever. The world sucks, man. It's rotten like a fallen apple.
Yeah.
Fuck.
So our sponsor CN has a plan for Canada's grain crop. It affects our farmers and shippers and the economies of whole communities along CN's vast network. It is, in fact, so important that the railway is obligated by law to draw up a comprehensive plan and publish it. It just did so. Moving the grain crop out of the Canadian prairies is a staggering job. Last year, CN moved a record amount, something on the order of 31 million metric tons. That included wheat and canola and was accomplished despite labor disruptions at Canadian ports and the early arrival of some ferociously cold weather. CN railroaders are nothing if not adaptive. And the railway is determined to meet demand again this season, which, by the way, just started. As I said last week, it has spent some serious money to ensure it is ready. The railway has laid down a lot of new track and expanded its fleet of specialized hopper cars and high horsepower locomotives, all to ensure our farmers' grain moves to market promptly. There's a but here, though, and it's a significant one. CN is regulated by the federal government, and new federal regulations will have an effect on grain movement this year. There's no way around that. Changes to labor laws mean the railway needs more staff to move the same amount of freight. It also makes it harder to plan rail traffic movement and reduces supply chain efficiency. CN also opposes another federal initiative I've talked about here before, extended interswitching. Basically, that involves forcing railways to move freight back and forth between each other instead of directly to markets. It's inefficient at a time when we need maximum efficiency. All that said, CN is ready. It will give Canada's farmers maximum performance. Period.
I think waiting until November 2026, like I think it's super untenable for Canadian industry. And I agree with Kory that that's the thing that's most likely to move Trump. Like in fact, it's the only thing. But there is like also a window, I think, prior to that, as you see deteriorating job numbers in the US, deteriorating economic outlook, where you can push for more of a globally coordinated response. It still remains true that Canada has been out front fighting these tariffs more aggressively, alongside China, but than a lot of other countries. And I think that the solution for us lies in that. Like there has to be more of a coordinated global push on this, and it cannot wait until the midterms, because at that point, you've massive structural changes to the Canadian economy in terms of where investments are made. Like you can't put that toothpaste back in the tube sort of 2 years in, right? So I think that there has to be continued focus on that as a option.
I want to call a G7 and a G20 without the United States. Just go, sorry. The rest of the world's going to have to actually reknit itself. So you've decided to take yourself off the fucking board. We'll formalize it.
Well, I'm not sure that that's going to happen, but I'm very attuned to what you said about what happens in Europe. If you see the European deal fall apart because of lack of support in member countries, I think that's going to stiffen the spine of other countries in terms of what you agree to and what you don't. But capitulating to Trump is an unpopular move for any country. There is no country in which that bodes well for you. And
So
I think Carney should learn
Kory?
from that.
Can
Sure.
I stop you for a sec? Because we're going to slide from this. I can tell that we're going to slide right from this into our clipping.
Rather like cheese from a
We're gonna
cracker.
slide right off the
I want
cracker
to slide
into this conversation, and I want to sort of start it by picking up where you're going and saying, do we need to be quiet as church mice and just take our lumps because we got this Kuzma exemption? Or do we fight hard and take the risk that he then makes it worse by taking away the Kuzma exemption from us and fully exposing us? I don't really know what the right thing to do is, but I know that a lot of the tough talk from the early days about ways in which we could meaningfully retaliate, like, for example, potash, seem to be off the table. Haven't heard about them for months and months and months. And is that because we can't do it ourselves, or because it's unwise to do it?
Well, I think it's a combination of the two. Like there is a punishment, and it's not about what Trump does in a tariff. There's a punishment to our own economy if we stop selling things to the United States. Like tariffs are kind of, as we've talked about in the early days of this, they're kind of like the chemotherapy of trade policy. Like it might save the patient, but it's going to make you very, very sick. It's going to drag you to the edge of death yourself in the process. So,
But American farmers don't have any option.
They they don't have any option. I think there's limit to what you can push on that, how feasible that is to do, logistically. Uh, I'm not sure that there is an appetite on the part of Saskatchewan in this case, to go down that road. So you would have to have the federal government, do it unilaterally, which comes with a set of national unity risks and other risks associated with it. But look, all of this to say, what Trump is
Well, if
doing
it's the,
is
but wait a
is
second, can I stop
damaging
you?
to them.
If it's the key to saving steel, aluminum, and lumber, then presumably
Yeah.
the Saskatchewan wouldn't be asked to carry that freight itself,
I,
right? It would be a
I,
national project in and of itself to.
I agree with that. I agree with that. But uh, I'm not sure it gets you closer to the goal line. Like I'm not sure that you do it that way. Uh, I think what the United States is doing, not just with Canada, is hurting itself. It's hurting its own economy.
Not in
It,
time, though.
well, not in time for what, right? Like,
Us.
well, I don't know about that. I am less pessimistic about what we can do in terms of ramping up domestic consumption if we're talking about the steel industry, for instance. I think there's more that we can do there. Uh, eh, but the gravity that is pulling on trade on trade policy is real. Like you can't increase the cost of everything that's an input into your economy and your own manufacturing sector without hurting it. Like the United States is in a process of committing grievous economic self-harm. And it's only once we realize that, tariffs in 2025 aren't any different than tariffs in the 1920s that, you're going to see a change in policy. So, we need to strap in, buckle up, whatever, and ride through this along with the rest of the world and try to do things that preserve as much of our industry in the meantime as possible and increase our trading relationships with other countries in the meantime as much as possible and develop national projects that we do have the control over as much as possible. Like, what's the alternative to that? I don't think there is one.
Well, I mean, I think the alternative is to take off the table and put into play some of the tougher measures that have, that have not been in play over the last few months. Like, I think there's a real risk that we're bringing a knife to a gunfight in this negotiation. You have a U.S. administration that is not playing by any sort of international trade rules, that is defying the laws of political gravity when it comes to and I agree with you, Kory, like everything that you say about what the impacts of the tariffs are going to be on the US economy are correct. But so far, it has not been sufficient to change course. And the question is, can we afford to wait that process out? Or is the structural damage to key industries in the Canadian economy too severe to sustain? And if that's the case, I mean, I think to me, the question that's really interesting politically in Canada is Carney going to face pressure to get tougher, to play hardball? And we certainly saw a little bit of movement in the numbers that came out from Angus Reid over the last week that Canadians continue to have an appetite and in fact have an increased appetite for that even since the election. And are we going to start to see measures other than very limited retaliatory tariffs put on the table? So that could be things like further tariff retaliation, export controls. Are we going to look at stockpiling critical minerals? And then on the other side of it,
Or we need
you
to mine
know,
them first before we can stockpile them.
you'll get
Right?
your time. You'll get
Isn't
your
that the
time.
problem?
No, listen, like the other piece to this though, and I think, Kory, you've touched on this, is the importance of supporting these industries through these attacks, right? And that has actually, in terms of keeping people at work, keeping people whole, and again, this is going to be a common theme, people kind of at the center of that response. This has been pretty limited. So there's been some government support so far for steel in terms of keeping people at their jobs, but we've not seen that Unifor has been out. They're looking for that help now for auto. Like, are we going to have an auto industry at the end of this is really the question. And I think that the notion that we can sort of afford to wait flies in the face of that desired outcome. So there needs to be, I think, some consideration about putting some of those tougher measures into play. There is appetite for it across the Canadian public. And there needs to be also some urgency around, I think, employment supports and fixing EI and things like that, because it's not just those impacted industries, it's all the other businesses in those supply chains, all the other businesses in those communities as well that are likely to see layoffs in the coming months. And we got to be ready for that.
Okay, let's bring the clipping into.
Hang
let's
on,
bring
hang on. Wait, I want to say one. I want to add one thing. It's on this because this idea of should we, because we have CUSMA, should we play our cards very carefully and quietly for the next year as we await the resumption of those talks? I think that would be a colossal mistake. It would be to have closed our eyes to what's occurred over the last 6 months, which is that Trump is a merciless, absolutely unscrupulous partner, which we know in abstract, but he has demonstrated, and it's important to underline it in bright lights, that that's how he's conducted himself. And therefore, if he senses that we are being reserved because we fear that he may take away CUSMA, then he will know that his play is to take away CUSMA, and then we'll be in retreat. And it's like canceling the DST. It's just that we are in complete. So we need to, and this is where I disagree, I think, with Jordan in terms of time. We have to figure out to ourselves, how do we not repeat the last 6 months? Because he's going to come for CUSMA. So how do we strengthen our hand? And how do we not be in a position where we're just asking? Because the answer will be no to ask him for something he doesn't want to give. He senses leverage. So we need to increase our strength and increase our leverage. And I do think that means we need to come to grips with this discussion about the cards that we do hold on energy, on potash, on critical minerals. And we need to think about how would we create offsets for domestic producers so that we can make it viable for them to accept that we would start to talk about holding these things somewhat hostage in that discussion. And that can't happen now. If we do that now, he'll just explode. But you do that when you're closer to the talks. You do that so that when we enter the talks, we say, well, here's our schedule of events. Okay, so if we can't secure some kind of renewal that is on decent terms, then here's the schedule of what we're going to do on these vital points. And it won't be now, but within 3 months, it'll do this. Within 6 months, it'll do that. And we start hitting those things, and we announce that there'll be corresponding offsets to try to support our producers and cushion that blow. And yes, it will kick off a massive debate internally, but then Trump will be responding to us. Because if we're in the world of just entering those talks saying, this is what we would like, it's in our mutual interest, he'll say there's nothing in our mutual interest. Go blow it out your ass like he has. So we have to strengthen our hand, and we have to be honest. There's only so many ways to do that.
Right. You are also dealing with somebody, though, who has a lot of leverage over us and is unafraid to use every little tiny bit of it. So I think we need to think harder about how we use a certain bit of nomenclature. People working in government often refer to key issues or the tasks on their desk as files. And I get it from an organizational need to get this thing accomplished point of view. I did it myself in the first ad in this series from our newest sponsor, the Canadian Climate Institute. I said, the cost of inaction on the climate file is a hell of a lot greater than the cost of action, which is true. But with respect to all who work so hard in government on this issue, calling climate change a file diminishes what it is, one of the most existential economic and social challenges of our time. It fuels extreme weather disasters, like the wildfires burning this and every summer, puts Canadian lives and health at risk, threatens our communities and livelihoods, erodes economic growth, and drives up the cost of living. Friends, the Climate Institute is in this fight. They are Canada's most comprehensive, objective, and authoritative source of research on climate change, producing evidence that, hopefully, leads us to the smartest policy solutions. Their 5 research priorities are accelerating low-carbon growth and economic competitiveness, reducing carbon pollution and accelerating the shift to cleaner energy and technologies, calculating the economic costs of climate change and improving resilience to climate-related threats like extreme weather, supporting and amplifying Indigenous research and solutions, and advancing sustainable finance ideas. As I said before, this is all existential. Geez, I was going to say stuff, but that diminishes it the same way calling it a file does. Let's just leave it at existential and end on a more hopeful note. There is no shortage of policy solutions, and the technologies we need to cut carbon pollution, keep energy affordable, and drive our economy are already here. The longer we wait, the higher the price for people, nature, and our economy. Let me go to our clipping of the week, which is Robert Benson from the Toronto Star. Doug Ford says the quiet part out loud. The loquacious Ontario Premier has always been quotable, but rarely more so than when he's railing against U.S. President Donald Trump's trade attack on Canada. Helpfully playing the bad cop to partner Mark Carney's good cop, Ford, as a subnational leader, can get away with saying things the Prime Minister can not. To wit, hours before Trump slapped a 35% tariff on goods, the Premier came out swinging. I told the Prime Minister, do not roll over. Hit that guy back as hard as we possibly can. Prime Minister Carney is trying his best, but this guy will say something one day and he'll wake up and the cheese slips off the cracker, and then all of a sudden he goes the other way. And you're thinking, how do you deal with a guy like this? Indeed. So, let's start this conversation, Scott, with your observation about the Prime Minister's, let's say, very measured response to the 35% tariff decision.
Well, I just think that it's interesting that at almost every turn, what Carney chooses not to do from a communications and political standpoint. He does not, he is the politics of de-escalation. He is the politics of the wet blanket, because we get the DST, he holds the slightest of veils, as I mentioned earlier. He comes by, gives a clip, says more or less, we're going to sort of build our own stronger, more positive economy here. We're going to work with new partners. Canada strong, and moves along. This event occurs, this monumental event, essentially the breakdown of talks, as far as we know and can tell, with no indication of any resumption of talks, or, so these tariffs hit, that's it. 12:35, he issues a statement. 12:35 in the middle of the night, Carney issues a statement. This is essentially the same thing that he said before. It's all very measured. It's calm. It's sort of like, hey, you know what? Don't shoot your pants. Let's not everybody like flip out. I'm not going to hold a press conference with a bunch of business and union leaders and act like the world has come to an end. So it's admirable in that way. But I do think that it also sustains a kind of a complete lack of line of sight for Canadians and for voters. We're all like, well, what is going on, and what is at stake, and what happens next, and what are our contingencies, and what might the impacts of this be? Like, there's kind of nothing coming. So at some point, I don't know that that's a sustainable communication strategy. I just think that's interesting. With respect to Rob, I would just say this. I've made the same point. Like, whenever this came up the other day when he was doing that, I was on TV and radio, and I was making the same point. I was going, yeah, like, this could arguably even be coordinated. You know what? I can't go out there and say this. So Doug, like, let him have it, rip it. And then I could say to my US counterparts, Jesus Christ, look, like, we've got domestic politics too. I got the Premier of Ontario, largest province, breathing down my neck saying, let's hit back hard, So guys, like, we got to work. My only point would be, that doesn't matter. Doesn't matter any more than when we go into the talks with Leichnitz. They don't hear. They don't care. Like, can you imagine Carney saying to Trump, I've got a lot of domestic pressure on me politically. Like, can we work? I know that worked with Paul and with Bush when they were talking about ballistic missile defense. And like, Bush's response was, yeah, man, like, I know, I hear that Quebec's all over this thing, whatever. Like, you deal with your politics, no big deal, like, whatever. We'll pick this up when we can pick this up. Trump would never say that. Trump is like, what the fuck? So if it's a strategy, it may be satisfying for ourselves, and I'm not damning Ford for doing it. But if it's a strategy that's taking us no place, because nothing works against this guy. It's not like he's consuming our media or concerned with our considerations.
Yeah, but it's obviously filling an emotional gap for Canadians, I think, Jordan.
Totally.
I think people want to hear it.
People definitely want to hear it. They demonstrably want to hear it. And I think that, to pick up on Scott's point, in the regular world, this would be a very tenable strategy for the Prime Minister to have people he can point to within his coalition to say, like, listen, I'm not the craziest one here. Look at this guy. Like, I'm presenting you with some moderate solutions. Let's get to the finish line on this before these folks push me further than we want to go. But that's not the world that we live in. And I'm not sure that what Ford is doing solves the political challenge that Carney is sort of finding himself in, which is the distance between the type of rhetoric that he campaigned on and the type of rhetoric and the actions that he's taking now. And I think that it's interesting to see the contrast between his reaction on some of Trump's trade announcements, which is very wet blanket. It's very nothing to see here. And I agree with that because I think, you never want to be sort of dancing to the tune of your opponent on this. And so he should,
But it feels like Trudeau would be doing it differently.
Trudeau would probably be doing it differently. I don't know that he would be doing it better, but choosing your own time, I think, is always a good move. But I actually don't think that Carney is a wet blanket communicator across the board at all. And in fact, I think, and we're maybe going to talk later about it, but for example, his statement on Palestinian statehood was a real example of like that is that was bold communication. He went out and just held a big press conference on we're making a significant change to our Mideast policy. So that is not his only mode of operating. So that means that when it comes to trade, this is a specific choice for him. He's casting himself and Ford in different roles here. But to return to what I was saying earlier, it doesn't solve his political problem because the question I think that some Canadians have, and certainly this is something the Conservatives have picked up on and are trying to needle in there, is the difference between that rhetoric during the campaign, that idea of elbows up, that energy to kind of take tough measures and fight the US, and what they're seeing from Carney now. And now it may be very true that all efforts are being made, that, and I think, for example, Don LeBon's interview with Paul Wells was really interesting in terms of some of the details of how those negotiations really did go up to the wire and what's going on. And all that may be well and true. But I don't think anybody outside of the Queensway is reading that stuff, right? So Canadians are not getting a glimpse into the process that's happening, and they're not really getting a connection to that earlier story that they saw of Carney that was exciting to them and inspired confidence to them. So I don't think it's an immediate problem for him. Canadians are clearly still extending him their support and trust that he can sort of navigate this. But it is something that he's going to have to square at some point, that he was hired to really be tough on Trump in solving the problem, and that hasn't really what's been manifest in his communication so far.
Is that what he was hired to do, or was he hired to be successful?
Well, I mean, I think it was hard to be successful, but I'm not sure that that's on the table, to be honest with you. So in the absence of being successful, I think that there is a tonal mismatch still that he can address.
Right.
Most of my family are conservatives. I went to the cottage this weekend. Tons of cousins were there. They're like almost all conservative voters. It was interesting. They all said two things. One, we fucking hate Trump. Man, we hate Trump. And two, well, what's Carney supposed to do? And I don't know how long this will last, but I really do think there is a kind of, well, how it's like fighting the Gorn. How are you supposed to what are you supposed to do against something like this? So I think I think that he's got a lot of political rope, Carney.
Kory, does the Premier of Ontario, is he laying track for the Prime Minister to be tougher, or is he actually judging the Prime Minister for not being tough enough?
Well, I think he's laying track, but I would disagree with the assertion that what Ford's been doing doesn't matter south of the border. I think it matters a lot because I think he's largely been doing it on U.S. networks, and I think that gets the attention of the administration more than some countervailing tariff that we put on in some subsector that doesn't do tons of damage to us, but is probably not that impactful to them either. I think having Ford go on Fox News day in and day out it does get the attention of the United States. It does put a counter narrative out there around how this is committing harm to the U.S. economy, reminding Americans that, hey, Canada is your number one export market. We buy more stuff from you guys than the next 10 countries on the list combined. So remember that we're your customer. You're hurting your neighbor and your ally. You're enriching and emboldening China and rival powers in the world. These are all points that are absolutely fucking true, and they need to be made in the U.S.
What makes you
Now,
think it has
I don't
any impact?
You know what? I think
Honestly.
to be honest, Kory,
because
to
the
be,
angry calls that we get from
But
members of the U.S. administration every time he does it.
like it's a world of the ugly American is now the American, and I don't think they give a rat. This whole appeal of like we're your best, we're buying stuff from you, and you're hurting your neighbor. I
So
think they're like
so
fuck
what
you. We
so
couldn't
what's
care less. We don't have neighbors. We're America.
I
We're
think
the
if I think
tallest.
I know what's hurting
whoa
Trump.
whoa whoa whoa.
I know what's hurting Trump. I think if I got on Fox News and had an opportunity to say anything, I'd talk about Epstein.
Yeah.
That's what's hurting
Yeah,
Trump. I would
seriously.
fucking say he's on the goddamn list and he's afraid. I would just keep reinforcing that. It's amazing of all the shit that Trump has done, of all of the crazy, consequential shit that Trump has done. What bites? This Epstein thing.
Sure. So we'll see what happens with Trump, and we'll see what's happening with Trump's popularity. We'll see what's happening with the U.S. economy. But like, are you saying like is Doug Ford or someone else going out in the U.S. media, like bringing the administration to its knees? No, it isn't. But it is useful and helpful in several ways. One, it's I think good for Canadian morale to see somebody actually picking up, a club and fighting because there is an appetite for that, very huge appetite. There's a reason why Ford is the most popular politician in Canada right now, and it's because of this.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's
Uh,
actually pretty great for Doug Ford, which is
but
a big takeaway on this.
we've got to make the case to the U.S. electorate that this is wrongheaded, that this is committing self-harm, because guess who isn't doing it? The fucking Democrats. As bad as Trump is unpopular as he is, even in the United States. Like, what's his approval down to? Like, 37 right track or something. Like, it's abysmally low. But you know who's even less popular? The fucking Democrats.
Well, of all
So
the things they disagree with Trump on, this is probably low on the list, frankly. Protectionists
true,
themselves. Yeah.
true.
Totally.
So, all of this to say, no one is making the case against this outside of, the Wall Street Journal and some folks in, Bloomberg, basically the business press that actually understand what this is doing to the U.S. economy. And in time, I think it will
Oddly,
be,
Murdoch is the guy with the gonads to stand up to him, eh?
yeah,
Like
love
the
it.
Wall Street Journal is the official opposition in the
yeah.
United States.
Well,
If you want to
even he
hear
knows he's
This
going to
timeline
die.
continual
is so
barrage
fucked.
against the Trump administration, read the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah. Well, it's a principled attack on what is a very left-wing view of the world that Trump is executing on in terms of trade policy. So, look, we've got to make the case. You got to make the case to the U.S. electorate. It doesn't make sense to just go on CBC and pat each other on the back to, all dozen viewers. Like, it does not matter. You got to get into the U.S. media and you got to make the case there.
Okay. So, Jordan, I want to go to our third topic and pick up where you were at on Carney fight and what Carney's mandate is. Because the statement about Palestinian statehood that he made last week, which I can tell you has landed like the Hindenburg among the Jewish community in Canada. But that statement, I'm pretty skeptical about it because the conditions that were laid out, I can't see them being met, to be honest. And so if those are actually conditions, then it won't happen. So I'm not quite as exercised. But what is really interesting to me is the coordination with Europe. What is really interesting to me is that came out on the heels of France and England and Spain, and we were part of that. And it feels to me like the timing was completely dictated by that, because given what Carney had going on in terms of the U.S. and a bunch of other stuff, the timing of the Palestinian state thing doesn't make sense unless you view it as part of the European coordination play. So he is, and maybe too quietly, Scott, maybe he should be talking more to Canadians about this, but he is doing some stuff that is reshaping our global status.
Totally.
Jordan, do you want to go?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right on the timing. Like, there have been moments in this conflict where Canada has had sort of the opportunity to get on the bus with the Europeans or get off the bus, and this was one of them. And Carney chose to get on, and I'll say on the outset, I think it's the right move. I think it's probably something that should have come a little bit sooner, but this is very much about coordinated global pressure on Israel in the face of the famine. That's really what this is about. And secondarily, this is also about joining a coordinated global move to salvage some hope of a two-state solution, right? And I think what's interesting about this announcement politically for Carney is that this is the timing actually, because there would have been a lot of voices who would have said that this is not ideal timing domestically because of the negotiations with the US. Um, and he did it anyway. And I think that there were steps that were taken. So this is something that clearly did not come out of nowhere. So there was movement and discussion about this in the months previous. But it's so notable to me because, we had this discussion. We talked about statehood a little bit back in spring of 2024 when the NDP put forward a motion on that nearly cleaved the Liberal caucus in two. And they ended up pulling it out, Palestinian statehood, out of the motion because it was so controversial and divisive within the Liberal Party at that moment. And what is equally notable to me is that Carney has made this declaration, changed an important piece of Canadian foreign policy in the Mideast. And we have heard what I would argue is a pretty muted response from within the Liberal caucus, notwithstanding some of the statements from Anthony Housefather and others that you would sort of expect to have. It's been pretty
Stephanie
muted.
Levitz has a good piece about this.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, which I think talks a little bit about some of those dynamics. So that to me is actually the most interesting thing here. And I think that that's some deft handling on his part. And it's also a recognition that like in the face of what we are seeing right now, inaction it was untenable politically, also in Canada, but also morally, internationally, it was the wrong move. And I think it's also a signal that Canada continues to have independent international foreign policy. And you can think of other moments like that where we've diverged from the US. Of course, the Iraq War is sort of the classic example. There are many others. But those moments are important. It's also a signal, I think, about Carney's reorientation towards Europe. And here I think we're seeing some of his close ties to the UK and his connections to France like coming into play in a positive way, not just about trade, but also about Canada's position on the international stage. And look, the reality is that Canada has not been seriously consequential in this conflict in a long time. And so making this move was a way for us to make a bit of a difference. Now, I would argue there's more to be done. And that there are steps that Canada can look at taking to increase pressure to end, the deprivation of aid that we're seeing in Gaza, to go towards a ceasefire, to get towards a two-state solution. But really, this is a big change. I actually would sort of, disagree with you, David. I don't think, the conditions that have been laid out, which I think are the right conditions, and those are conditions that you've seen discussed in the past, of course, in the context of a potential peace process. But it is very unlikely to me that the Carney government would have laid out those conditions only to have the possibility of not recognizing the state of Palestine 6 weeks later if they're unmet. So I think they have every intention of going through with the recognition in September. And they're going to allow for some judgment of progress towards those goals in terms of that justification. But I actually thought this was so interesting in terms of what it says about the caucus internally for the Liberals, what it says about the change that's happened on the ground, how isolated Israel is increasingly, and Canada's orientation towards Europe, which is allowing us to be part of a global effort here that I think is really significant.
Scott, when I heard the Prime Minister talking about the situation and what prompted his decision to recognize the Palestinian state, I thought he was this far from calling for regime change in Israel.
Yeah. Well, because I think there are two clear motivations for this decision, which is quite startling, really. I mean, if you want to put it in the context of recent decades of Canada's foreign policy, and particularly its policy with respect to the Middle East, it's a landmine. And so, and the two motivations obviously are a genuine desire to pressure Bibi because the situation is so indefensible in Gaza just from a humanitarian perspective. And so I think that's obviously a large part of it. But then I also do think there's a geopolitical calculation on his part around reorientation with Europe. I also think that if we want to throw the real politic into it, he would not have made this move when he made this move if talks were going well with the United States with respect to trade. So when people go, well, it's like some people say admiringly, well, he did this even though. I'm like, well, I don't know. If he'd been on the brink of a breakthrough, I think that we would have kept our horns pulled in. And, separately for people who say, my God, he made it inevitable that this deal could not. No, but he knew that we were nowhere on talks. And so this allowed him to say, well, maybe the better play here is to deepen our ties with Europe and to align with those guys. And this is what might be an unexpected demonstration of that comedy. But I'm with you. Like, I don't think it's possible. I'm a little nervous that our conditions will slide. Like, I'm a little nervous that we'll.
Well, that's a different matter. That's a different matter altogether.
I am really nervous about that, and this is not where I probably would have gone personally in terms of my world outlook. Obviously, but as a longtime sort of strong supporter of Israel, but it's very hard to be a strong supporter of BP these days.
But it's not actually possible. It's not actually possible, and regardless of whether or not you are. The fact is that the entire Western world has made a decision about Netanyahu, and it's fucking unanimous.
Yeah. I would just, I don't think it's possible to say root and branch, somehow the Palestinian Authority is going to be able to drum Hamas out of the political and cultural life of it's not possible. Those hostages, are they going to be returned? I mean, we'll sort of see where that question ends up, what the hard choices are. Last thing I would say is this: there is a lasting domestic political calculation that reaches past reorientation with Europe and where we're at in trade talks with the United States and what might happen. And that is that I think there has been a creep. There has been a change that's been happening in terms of where the Jewish vote in Canada, if you can call it a quote unquote Jewish vote, where it's at. It is never coming back to Liberals now. Like, it's gone. And so,
well, you can go further, Scott. You can go further, and you can say that part of Jordan's surprise at the lack of reaction from the Liberal Party is that there almost are no Jews involved in the Liberal Party anymore.
So this issue, which I think is unhelpful, has become partisanized, right? Like, I now think that this, and so how does that community, to the degree to which it self-identifies politically as a community within Canada, how does it vote? When we know the answer before we ask the question now. You didn't used to 30 years ago. Right. And I think that has implications of all round. And I think that's unfortunate, but it's almost unstoppable.
Kory?
Yeah, I don't think that the conditions will be met. I see no chance of that happening. But to Jordan's point around that, or Scott, or to all of you, did those conditions slide? Did they do it anyway, despite not meeting the conditions? But I don't see any chance that the conditions are met. I think it'd be a mistake. I think it's a mistake to have done it. In terms of what our policy towards Israel should be, notwithstanding the fact that your comments on Bibi, I think, are overwhelmingly the case. The world is losing confidence in that government, or is lost, I think, is probably more accurate way of saying it. And I think it's having an effect on how the rest of the world views Israel as a whole. And I think it's damaging to Israel in the long term to have that government in charge and to take such a hard line on food aid, etc. The images coming out of there are like unconscionable. But that said, guess who's still in charge? Hamas. And you're not gonna root them out, I think, is the reality. So I don't know what the solution is. Maybe somebody out there does. Maybe Janice Stein or somebody a lot smarter than me has some path forward on this. But I'm not smart enough to know what it is. But I think the politics of it, though, I think you've nailed it. I don't think there's much support in the Jewish community for the Liberal Party of Canada. I think they're almost all voting Conservative right now. I think that'll continue to be the case. I think this will push, people even further into the conservative camp. But that's a trend that's been going on for a very long time. And, but that said, I don't think we're going to recognize the Palestinian state. I don't think there's a state there to recognize to begin with. So, we'll see.
Last word, Jordan?
Well, I mean, I think, ultimately the question on this is, can this play a constructive role in empowering moderates in order to get to a place where the two-state solution is viable again? And I mean moderates on both sides here. Because the reality is that right now, the two-state solution is completely dead. Yes, because of Hamas, but also because Netanyahu has less than no interest about this. They're out talking about annexing the West Bank. I mean, just yesterday, Ben Gvir was at Al-Aqsa Mosque praying. Like, these are provocations. This is in the wake of that international pressure. They are deepening their commitment to the war in Gaza, to continuing the aid blockade. So something has to change externally. And so that means international pressure has to turn up. But at the end of the day, what's going to make the most difference here is what the US does. That is really the path in terms of ending this, for better or for worse. Trump's capriciousness on this is probably what's going to make the difference. So I think for the Canadians, a lot of Canadians who are watching really with horror what's happening there, a lot of eyes are turned to Washington, and we matter, maybe not as much as we used to, but Trump matters the most.
All right. Yeah. Okay.
It's heavy, man.
What
It's
a
a heavy
downer of
week.
a
It's a
program.
heavy
Jesus
world.
Christ.
It really is. It's just left me with a weight on my shoulders. All right, Gordon Pinsent, can you try to mercifully wrap this thing up for us, please?
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
Well, I've got one, and it's going to be difficult because I got to pronounce a difficult to pronounce name. Guess who I'm doing mine on? Gary Ananda Sangari. Is that correct? Is that the right way of pronouncing it?
No idea, really.
Yeah. Anyway, our public safety minister.
Scott, you want to step up for that test?
No, I said it on TV the other day. I was obligated to talk about the situation, and I did learn that. I'm sorry. This is rude. This is a person's name, but I learned it for about a minute, and now it's
gone. All right. So
I'm sorry. It's rude sounding.
Gary A. How about
Can't
that?
say Reid either.
I think he's really weak. I don't see a reason to have this guy in cabinet, period, but certainly not as public safety minister. Like, he's generated a bunch of headlines that I think are all negative for the government. This is a government that competence and being businesslike and being on top of files seems to be part of their brand and part of Carney's brand. And Carney's sort of out there, and his team is out there saying if people don't perform, they're going to get moved. Well, this guy ain't fucking performing, and probably shouldn't have been put there in the first place. Like, maybe if you were in some minor portfolio on the periphery of government, and you had signed letters of support for somebody being 4 times rejected for a visa as a result of being affiliated with a terrorist group, that maybe you could do that if you were the minister for paper clips and post-it notes. But as the minister of public safety, no fucking way. This guy needs to go. The sooner they get rid of him, the better. He's bad for their brand. He's bad for that portfolio, and he should be moved on.
All right. Jordan, I'm going to ask you to go next because you're so fucking heavy today. So I don't want.
Well, you're assuming I'm going to be heavy today.
Well, you've been heavy all day, and
it is. It's fucking heavy.
Yeah.
No, I'm going to be mean. Which is a light difference, but I'm going to pick on a friend, one of your friends, not one of my friends. I'm picking on Evan Solomon. So my hey you is going out to the Minister of AI this week because Dave Coletto came out with some numbers yesterday that caught my eye on Canadians' views on AI and work. They're really interesting. You should go check them out. And it's not actually the first polling that we've seen on this. which I'll save you the clicks, but basically there's significant concern about the impact of AI on jobs in Canada, especially among young people. And most Canadians think that there's going to be net job loss around the adoption of AI. And so my hey you is going out to Minister Solomon because, he's been out, he's got a portfolio that is clearly of interest to Prime Minister Carney. Every time the Prime Minister is asked about how we're going to find efficiencies and we're going to do these cuts without, compromising services, well, the answer is AI. And how are we going to fix productivity? Well, it's going to involve AI. And, all these things may be true. But it turns out that Canadians are not yet along for this ride, and with good reason. There is a lot of concern because we've seen evidence so far that large-scale adoption of AI is not great for workers, that it can lead to exploitation, it can lead to unfair decisions, it can lead to all kinds of negative consequences that are bad for us as an economy and bad for us as a society. And yet, Minister Solomon is out, and when he talks about his mandate, he is so eager to distance himself from the Trudeau government that he's out talking about de-emphasizing regulation and emphasizing innovation, which I am sure sounds excellent to a lot of the tech companies. But holy hell, that is fucking terrifying to Canadians. And I would also submit probably really bad, particularly when you're trying to re-engage some of the younger Canadians who have departed the Liberal Party support base around issues like employment, like worries for their future, like economic insecurity. And when we live in a time where we have broken literally every single societal pact with young people, go to school, work hard, you'll get a job, you'll get a house. Like none of that shit is true anymore. And now AI is going to play probably a pretty big role in eliminating some of those entry-level jobs that people would use to get a leg up in their career. It's going to contribute to the growth of the gig economy where workers have fewer rights, where people can't count on the supports that they need for their families to have that kind of economic security. And who is that on? That's going to be on young people. So all of these things are out there. And I have it on reasonably good authority from a number of labor unions that Minister Solomon can't be bothered to return their calls. I don't think that's great. I think he should probably be involved in some engagement with workers, with young people. I think he should talk positively about regulation of AI before this comes and creates huge new political and societal cleavages that are probably going to bite his own party in the butt. These would all be smart things to do on the front end of this rather than on the back end, and particularly on an issue where the Prime Minister's own personal brand is so closely tied with the topic. So that is my hey you this week. Lots of free, mean advice from Minister Solomon.
Well, he's new in politics,
Yeah, well, hey, I mean, I guess some people get allowance for a learning curve and others don't, but like...
He's
it's gonna come
as
fast.
in charge of AI as I am of the planet Mars. Like it's like it does not matter that you put yourself down as the minister of AI. AI is going to do what AI is going to fucking do in the economy, and you can try to regulate it, and it's as meaningful as regulating fucking Mars. It's just not real,
well,
Jordan. It's
just not real. We are just going to hand the
hear.
keys of the PM over to Meta. Then I am just
to
welcoming our big tech overlords.
Influence on Mars. I really was hoping that Kory had some influence.
Yeah. Well, men are from Superman, there, apparently. I don't know.
In the new Superman movie, you will notice that the Fortress of Solitude is supported by 4 robots. Now, 20 years ago, that was a staff of 24 humans, and they've been replaced. It's more efficient. It's more efficient, but what about those jobs? Those people, they created a supply chain of food and services all the way to the Fortress of Solitude. Now you just have these steel robots that have, AI personalities.
It's coming. It's coming, and it doesn't matter what you or I or
anybody
else has to say.
Where is the Fortress of Solitude? Is it like in Brooklyn or something? Because in Superman 2,
Clark in Canada. Clark Superman's Canadian.
Walked from New York to the Fortress of Solitude in a windbreaker and loafers,
Right.
with no hat or gloves.
I'm
So it's
sure he
Maybe
flew a
like
little bit.
super
He flew a
heating
little
power?
bit.
Little-
Oh,
I
he'd
don't
given
know.
away his powers.
Oh,
He
that's
was
right.
no longer Superman.
Right.
He had
Mm.
abandoned all of that. He was just a guy, and he
Mhm.
walked to the Arctic.
Well, look, I'm not going to get into the Donner cut, and we about what happened to Superman 2 and the way it was originally shot as one movie, two movies at once, and then it was anyway. And Lester came in and it was reshot. But your point's a valid one, except for a movie making idiosyncrasy. I would say that the Fortress of Solitude is generally acknowledged to be just a little bit to the left and up from Frobisher Bay. So. My hey you is going to be a little less earnest than the rest of this show. My hey you, and I say it loud, and I say it, I'm proud. Hey, Justin Trudeau. Hey you, I see you. The whole world sees you. TMZ sees you, and you fucking go, buddy. Because you know what he's had for the past 6, 7
You're
months.
gonna hear me roar.
It's been a constant
Just like a
refrain of, oh, at least it's not Justin Trudeau. The premiers get together like, oh, the meeting isn't entirely satisfactory, but at least it isn't like what fucking was when Justin Trudeau was here. Everything sucked in and the coffee was cold and nobody liked it. And now it's like, oh yeah.
I hope he's having a
little
great time. I
teeny-weeny-
hope he's having the most fun. I really
No
do.
kidding. He has had a beating more or less for 2 years, particularly for 6 months. And you know what they say? Play to your strengths. What are his strengths? He's 6'2". He's a fucking tall drink of water. He's an international celebrity. And, oh, Pierre Polyev. Ooh, Mark Carney. There's
Who's
some
having a
fucking
better
magic.
summer?
Can any of them slam Katy Perry? He'll be banging Sydney Sweeney by this time we put out next week's pod. You go, Justin Trudeau. You show all the naysayers.
I mean,
You got your own path.
nice of her to be open to dating down. Like, I think that was really true.
I was a fan of
Nobody
the,
thought Trudeau was gonna have a better summer than Polyev.
There
I
you
was a
go.
fan of the headline that former astronaut dates first fake black prime minister. That one was pretty good.
That was good.
It's
My hey you goes out, and I could do it every week, but this week particularly bugged me. Trump fucking off. The jobs numbers are bad, so you fire the head of the labor statistics. Americans, this is so far down the road to autocracy. This is so far away from a functioning democracy. You people are losing track of where you are. This is moving fast. It's only been 6 months. He's metastasizing. He's doing things that are worse and worse all the time. And this may seem like a little thing. It's not a fucking little thing. It's a big thing. And somebody start paying attention in that country. Jesus Christ.
South Park. Well, all hopes are on Parker and Stone here.
There has to be an opposition. You work for a law firm that decides to defend somebody he dislikes. That law firm's targeted, doxxed, starved of its ability to generate clients. It's unreal.
Yeah.
It is.
Oh, we're not down the
it
path.
is
We're
fascism.
there. We're there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, folks. Thank you very much for joining me. I want to thank all the accursed who watch or listen to this show. We did it on a holiday, and we did it for you. And to our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and to our sponsor, CN and the Canadian Climate Institute, thank you very much. And everybody will be back next week with more of the Curse of Politics. Hey, have a great rest of your holiday, you three. Enjoy this time.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. See ya.